Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty. Thank you to everyone who's been watching and listening to the podcast. It's been a lot of really good feedback. Thank you to East Brother Beer, who continues to sponsor the show. And I think we might as well just dive right into it. We've got quite a few interesting topics to cover. The very first one is Senate Bill 50. So this is very interesting here because Senate Bill 50 basically is a law that's being introduced in order to create more inventory, more housing supply on the market. And basically the whole premise of the Senate bill is to create or allow cities and developers to build high density housing near transit centers. But no surprise, what we're seeing is a lot of backlash against this. People in San Francisco are really against this, and a lot of NIMBYs, so like people that not in my backyard. And it's very surprising because we all understand about the housing crisis. And again, we keep talking about it every single show that we do. And it seems like no one's getting into their head that it comes down to an inventory supply versus demand.
Well, it's surprising and it's not surprising. In fact, for the last several decades, I've seen this strange dichotomy, especially in the Bay Area, where, as Marc put out, NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And these are the exact same people who are complaining about a lack of housing. Now, to kind of put things in perspective, there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes into getting something just approved, let alone even being able to break ground when it comes to any type of housing, let alone multi-unit housing or housing with different types of classification where you have retail and residential, for example. And what SB 50 is supposed to do is supposed to be able to fast track and identify areas that are more ripe and require this more high density housing, specifically areas closer to transit zones like BART stations and things of that nature. So to kind of put things in perspective, you got San Francisco as the primary employment center where everybody wants to commute into, and of course floods I-80 or all of the freeways. And then now you got Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, and you have all these different people commuting in from all over the Bay Area in subdivision areas. And there's this need for higher density housing, apartment units closer to these employment centers. And then, of course, the bright idea would be to put them right next to a BART station.
Well, we also see the trend of people wanting to live closer to where they work, wanting to live near restaurants, shops, and their work. I mean, that's the trend where it's going. And if you look at some of the mega cities in the world, that's the way they're set up, and that's the way people want to live. And as the Bay Area continues to grow, that's really where we're going to. Now, one of the big arguments is that as these developments happen, that there's not much affordable housing available, and that a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom might be renting for $3,000 or $4,000 per month. And I think part of the backlash against this is that there's just not enough affordable housing being built, and you're going to end up with people simply claiming, well, yeah, these developers are just going to build these very expensive luxury apartments, and they're not going to build enough for the people that don't have much that need cheaper apartments. But that all goes back down to supply and demand.
That's actually a horrible argument. In fact, it's a false argument half the time, complete red herring, where there's not enough affordable housing. Because as somebody who actually goes out there and develops, there's a thing called inclusionary units. So the city will mandate a certain percentage of affordable and then very affordable housing. So you'll take out a percentage of your units that range anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20% of the number of units that you're allowed to develop. And the more units you develop, the higher that usually the inclusionary units will be. And then out of those inclusionary units, which are deemed or defined as affordable, 40% of them have to be very affordable, so very low income. And then it creates all these different dynamics. So this whole argument of that it doesn't address enough housing that people are making. And again, what we're talking about is SB 50. Am I saying that right? SB 50?
SB 50.
SB 50. There's so many different Senate bills out there that sometimes after a certain point, you're like, is it Senate Bill 49 or Senate Bill 50? But again, you're seeing a huge number of people come out. In fact, we'll probably play a clip there where They sing to the Queen song, we will stop you," which is this SB 50. And it's these people like pounding their feet to the tune of this Queen song, opposing this bill as though it's like the evil empire coming, to destroy the land. And when in fact it will probably bring us, the United States, up to speed with the rest of the world.
Okay, so moving on from that topic, we're going to power plants and property values. How do power plants affect property values? And recently, there's been some comments made that windmills drop value or drop property values. Is that true? Have you seen that? And
then to be really specific, windmills that we're talking about those wind generating turbines that you see out there that PG&E has installed throughout most of the Central Valley, if you're familiar with that in California, or different parts of more rural open space. And as Marc was bringing out, the argument was thrown out, or the word is out, that this is supposedly bringing property values down.
Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you live in the Bay Area, you're not going to see windmills being placed right next to the highway or anywhere close to these heavily populated residential areas.
Because they have to put them in areas that actually generate a lot of wind, and they've done wind studies, and generally it's in open space areas.
Correct. So when you're looking at where they're placing windmills, it's really in open space areas and much farther out from metropolitan areas. So when that's the case, guess what? Those property values are already going to be way less without those windmills than if they were located right in the city. And so I think people are just seeing a correlation and misunderstanding it for a direct cause and effect, right?
Right. Well, specifically, Trump made the comment, I think it was Trump, right? That windmills are bringing property values down. And then that catchword has gotten out there. And frankly, I think it's, again, just complete bunk. Now, there are certain arguments where if you're close to a nuclear power plant or a coal mine, that, yes, that probably will be less desirable.
But you can also pull examples of some areas where the coal mine, the closer you live to it, the more the property values go up.
Yeah.
Well, that would be if you're too close to it.
Right.
But the closer you are to it, if that's the main source of income for many of the residents in the town, you're going to see property values go up the closer you get to the coal mine. Now, there is a balance, right? Or at some point where, okay, well, now you might be too close to the coal mine, and then, yeah, you might have much higher rates of cancer, and then that just really depresses the neighborhood.
Right. Well, again, it comes down to the supply and demand and being close to where the action is, which is the whole reason why urban infill, in which is what SB 50 is trying to make easier to produce or fast track throughout the whole zoning requirements, is trying to address. That's the whole reason why those areas tend to be more expensive, because that's where people want to be. Whereas, again, property values being much less near windmills has nothing to do with the windmills, so to speak, as much as it does the fact that it was out there already, lower property values because it's in the middle of the rural boondocks, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking to go out and buy a property, it is something that you want to take into consideration where the local power plants are, because look at what happened to Japan. They had very clean nuclear fusion power plants, and what happened? It melted.
But that was because of Godzilla.
Yeah, that's right. And so it melted and completely destroyed towns, cities. And to this day, you cannot go into those cities unless you're properly guided by a tour guide and only under certain controlled days by the government. And no one lives there. Like, it's horrible there. So you could have a nuclear power plant that's very clean, works well, but then you could have a meltdown. All the more reason
to have more windmills, in my opinion, where it's clean power energy. And again, the setbacks from these windmills to is so far that you're probably not going to see houses really, really close or bordering these windmills, because if you've ever seen them driving through the freeway, they're all off towards the open space areas, and then maybe a subdivision or a group of houses is like several miles away.
And I think this is all going to change here very soon in California, because you have the electrification coming up. a lot of new developments are being required to have solar panels, renewable energy that fully powers their electrical
wind
needs.
power. And again, that's so that we can get away from gas and
Correct.
make everything electric, because that's a more sustainable source of energy as opposed to burning coal or getting natural gas and digging it up from the ground and things of that nature.
Which, when you consider that, is also another reason why construction costs go up. There's also another reason besides supply and demand that create very high construction costs, that at the end of the day, developers have to sell or rent properties for a lot of money. And it's because construction costs in California are very high, even labor, to the point where
Gas,
developers
oil.
have to import laborers from other states, even out of the country, to come to California to help out, which is a perfect transition into our next topic, and it's BART in Silicon Valley, along with the transit center that they're planning. So talking about bringing people from out of the country into California to help out with construction and development projects, I recently attended in San Jose a small one-day conference held by CCIM chapter, where they had San Jose mayor and they had several people working on this giant transit center that they want to build in downtown San Jose. And one of the people that is working on it is an architect from Australia. So, I mean, people are importing architects, right? And
Well, that's because they're doing it in other countries and they're doing it correctly. And then here we're getting bogged down with all this bureaucracy of people who want more affordable housing but don't want to build anymore and create more supply.
so one of the biggest problems that they're facing is that in the Bay Area, there's 28 transit agencies. 28.
Right.
Like, honestly, do we really need 28 transit
And to put that in
agencies?
perspective, that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen,
And they're all
most of which you don't even know how to cook.
and not just a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Everyone is a top chef, and everyone's trying to get the attention, and everyone's trying to control the entire kitchen.
Well, everybody thinks they're Gordon Ramsay. They're really not.
Exactly right. And so it was very interesting to see what their plans to develop this. And the San Jose mayor came out and he said that San Jose historically has done a phenomenal job of making it easy to leave downtown San Jose. They want to change that and make downtown San Jose a new, vibrant place that you want to live, you want to work in, and you want to visit and stay in. So what their plan is to build a giant transit center that models after some of the big transit centers in China, in Germany, and build a lot of commercial residential housing around it. Now, this type of transit center will have the high-speed rail that we've been talking about, the light rail, BART, buses, Lyft, Uber, but here's the catcher: no parking spaces for vehicles. So if you live in one of the rental units or one of the condos that they'll have available for sale, they will not come with parking because they want to encourage people to work there locally, shop there, eat there, spend their time there. And it's a very interesting project. It's a bit futuristic, I think. And I say futuristic for us, but it's not really, because many other countries are already doing it. And I think it's going to be great. But the problem is funding for all these different projects and the fighting between these 28 agencies.
That's the biggest thing, is the inter-fighting between the agencies, and then the inter-fighting between just the not in my backyards. Again, there's all of this push towards more dense housing, but doing it correctly so it's a pleasant experience. And it's no longer a theory. This is a proven and tested model that's worked in various countries for anybody who's traveled. Like, as you pointed out, in Germany and Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is actually really clean and really efficient. Japan, China. I mean, when you're talking about what were countries that were formerly third world in some cases, being now ahead of us. If anybody's ever visited those places, they look futuristic. So to us, when you come back to the States, it feels like we're coming back from the future.
Yeah, now my concern is where are they going to get the funding for all this? Look how long it took BART to get out to Antioch and to other different places. They've had plans to extend BART beyond SFO for how many years? They still haven't done anything. They had plans to extend BART to Hercules. Going into Vallejo would be perfect, would give Vallejo home prices and rental prices a big boost.
I remember when they were supposed to have the bullet train from Bakersfield to LA back in 1978. when I was a kid, and that
Exactly.
still hasn't been built. A lot of it is just to this infighting that goes in, people stopping it, holding it up, and then making it more and more costly and expensive.
Well, the High Speed Rail Authority was founded and started in 1996. They didn't get funding until 2008. And guess what? They still haven't done anything with it. And it's a big giant mess. There's too many people trying to control the projects, and it's not moving along the way it should be. But if they can figure this out and actually make it work, I think it's going to be huge for the Silicon Valley area, because the biggest problem that tech companies have is where are they going to house all their workers? Tech companies are looking at New York, Texas, Georgia, and other states looking for tech hubs where they can develop and house many workers. But if they have a high-speed rail here in California where maybe 30-minute commute high-speed rail, all of a sudden you can develop farther out areas. I think that's going to be very beneficial for a lot of their workers. So it could give Silicon Valley a whole new boost, which would be very exciting to see. Okay, our next topic is top features when you are selling your property. Now, we're going to focus specifically on rental properties and single-family homes. Brian, I know you've sold quite a few single-family homes yourself. What have you seen in trends today, in the past? What have been the most beneficial investments for people to make in their home in order to get the top dollar?
Well, going back to like all these different years, the one thing that always seems to have the biggest bang for the buck is upgrades to your kitchen. You got to remember the family spends a lot of time there, and I can go on and on with the different types of upgrades that have taken place in kitchens throughout the years. In fact, some of them I didn't even realize they do now, like the specific pot warmer thing that they have in these houses. But that always seems to be the biggest thing.
Wine cellars.
And wine cellars. Because especially whether you're living in a small condo or you're living in a big home, that's a central place that everybody is always going to go to and use. And then, of course, the other biggest things are the different types of upgrades to bathrooms. And these different upgrades change from the type of tile, from granite to marble to Corian, and different things that have been used throughout the last several decades.
Yeah. One thing that you hear a lot is upgrade, and you've heard us talking about bulletproofing, right? And what this means is simply to just upgrade with high quality and very high durable material.
It's not a literal bulletproofing. So like bullets will still go through these things if you actually discharge a firearm within these areas.
Yeah, so it's simply just putting in very high durable material. So instead of putting carpet, you're going to put in high-end, highly durable laminate wood floors that are commercial grade, right? That handles a lot of heavy residential use. They're waterproof, and guess what? You're not going to have to be replacing the floor every time you have a tenant turnover. They look nice. They have even tiles these days. Sometimes I tell people upgrade to tile instead. They have tiles that look like laminate flooring, and it gives it a completely different texture if you're not a huge fan of laminate flooring, and they look very nice. Now,
I remember just putting in the big giant square Spanish tiles years ago was the thing, and it was a very low maintenance idea because it was so durable. But like as you pointed out, a lot of those tiles mimic wood now, and they're just as durable, but they have that hardwood look feel.
Yeah, and now that you bring up tiles, this is something where when I tell someone upgrade your flooring and they ask me for examples, I say go tile or go laminate. And when they decide to go tile, they go with square tiles. Square tiles was the trend, and that was the thing to do 20, 30 years ago. Not today anymore. No one likes the square tiles, the ceramic tiles that are 6 inches
Right.
or a foot.
Well,
or
back
even
then it was functional, and now it's functional and aesthetic.
Yeah, now like you actually get more bang for your buck if you go with the wood looking tiles as opposed to the square tiles, because it's modern looking, it's new, it's fresh. Not many people have seen it. Not many people even know it's tile. It's very funny to watch people see those tiles and discover them for the very first time.
Yeah.
So those are certain things you can do to upgrade. Painting. I can't tell you how many times when someone paints an entire rental property just all white, tenants walk through, they're not impressed with the white paint. It looks boring. It looks very stale. They always ask, can we paint it a different color? However, if you simply just change the paint color to something a light gray, or just give it a different classy look with white
and more
trimming.
specifically, they call them two-tone, where they make,
Two-tone,
they
exactly.
have a white general feel for the room, or an eggshell color, but then they accent it with a gray.
Yeah, when I was selling foreclosures, we did Navajo white walls with Swiss coffee trim, and it was a big hit with people buying properties because to them it felt like a model home as opposed to just standard white paint.
Yeah.
And
it's not that expensive. I mean, paint is really inexpensive, but it makes a huge big bang for, appeal and the dollar.
Yeah. And then same thing with countertops, like going back to the kitchen, where a lot of people love to go back to the kitchen. I mean, for many cultures, food is a big deal. And
I think in all cultures, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember like parties where my family would have like 20 people, but it's enough food to feed 60 people.
Even for me, where I avoid spices, and meal prep is a huge issue. The more counter space, the more meal preps I can prepare for the rest of the week.
Exactly. And so going back to counter space, avoid tile counters and go with Corian, quartz, granite, stone. Even granite, though. I mean, granite's gotten very cheap these days, but it's little by little going out of style. I'm seeing more people go toward Corian quartz.
Right. Well, and just to close that, all of these ideas can work not only for your single family home, but for your rental properties, and more especially for your rental properties, because if you're a landlord, you want to keep your expenses and repair costs down. And so the more you actually make bulletproof material, you put bulletproof materials into your units, the less likely you're going to have to replace them with costly turnovers when tenants leave.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our property analysis. So, Brian, what are we analyzing today?
Well, we got another 4-unit building again in the city of Richmond. Again, we're looking at different properties that are within striking reach of most people as their initial investment. And so this particular fourplex actually have a little bit of history. I sold it literally like I think 15 or 18 years ago, and it's passed through my hands as a listing agent twice, and it's back on the market.
Now, isn't that a bit odd? This is going to be a little bit off topic, but when you've been in the business so long that you see properties come up that you sold before, does that still feel a little weird to you?
In fact, I've been in it so long that oddity feeling has gone away. It's just like, oh, I've done this again, And so at this time, I remember when this 4-unit building was like $195,000, and then I sold it for like $275,000 and then resold it for $350,000. Now it's come back on the market. It's a 4-unit building. It's a 60-year-old building in the city of Richmond, built in 1959, and it's comprised of 4 units that are all 2-bedroom, 1 bath. So this is a really good configuration. The interesting about this particular property, it's like what we've been saying all along, is that it's a very good time to buy now. The cap rates are beginning to inch back up, and they're doing this as a result of dropping their price, especially in places like Richmond, where you have rent control, and so the value of the property can be restricted because of the income that it generates. So,
it's very interesting too, because right now, like literally right now, we're going through a very odd time with rental properties, and we're having to do price reductions across the board. There are minimal price reductions, but $50 to $100 it's a good time for tenants to get back into the rental market.
No, totally. In fact, I mean, I recall a time when a lot of these 2-bedroom, 1-bath units were asking $575 to $625, and I remember when they had gone up to $850. And then when the market really began to run rampant between 2000 and 2004, that same $850 to $900 2-bedroom, 1-bath jumped all the way to $1,200, $1,250. And then during the recessionary period, it dropped to about $1,100. And then you've seen it run up again. In fact, you'll see that in some of the prices that are reflected in this particular 4-unit building. The rents are $1,800, $1,212, $1,212, and $1,155. So it's currently got a gross income of roughly $5,379 a month, and that annualizes to about $64,548 a year. The interesting thing too is that this property was pushing the value, asking $830,000, and more recently it's had a price reduction of $90,000 to a new asking price of $740,000. again, I said earlier that the values of these properties are being restricted by the amount of income they can generate. Because again, you hear me use this term a lot, loss to lease. This property, if it was all fully rented to market, and I'm being conservative about this, and I'm using $1,975 per unit for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, bringing it up to an income of $7,900 per month or $94,800 a year from the current $5,379 or $64,000 and some change per year. The value of this property could command at a 6 cap as much as $1,054,000. But because the rents are low, the value gets capped just because the return decreases. So the reason I was focusing on this particular property, other than the fact that I've seen it reduced $90,000, which to me kind of like indicates a possible deal. There's a reason maybe the owner is now beginning to realize that the property isn't going to sell for $830,000 and property has to put off a certain cap rate. So I always like to investigate these types of properties. At its current new asking price of $740,000, I'm just going to give you a quick couple of highlights. The property is roughly starting at a 4.87 cap. So between you and I, there's still some room on that price. Again, what I always like to do is check what the current principal balance is by looking at public records, seeing what the owner owes, and doing a reverse calculation based on it, the time they took the loan and the present day, and see if there's any room on that price and try to find out if there's any motivation. So again, we're always looking for different value adds in this show to get into the income property game. If you were able to ride this all the way from its current rent to its market rent, and that's a 31% loss to lease. Again, that's a difference of 30% between what it's actually getting and what it should be getting, if not for the restriction of rent control, which is I think like 3% a year, right?
3.6 this year right now.
Okay, so it's gone up a little bit, 3.6 per year. My calculation is just using a 3% increase per year. You're raising your cap rate from a starting 4.87 to a 5.11 to a 5.35 to a 5.6. And again, that's just in the event that you're keeping the exact same tenants in there and that you're raising them with the current rent control increases that are allowable. So the big thing with this property is that when you're looking at properties like this and looking for a deal, you're looking at the rent roll really closely, looking at how long these tenants have been there, and seeing what the possible attrition rate might be. Because if a tenant does move out voluntarily, you can go right to market. And again, by going right to market, you create a huge value add. For those of you who don't understand what I mean by value add, you're raising your cost basis, what you bought it for, whether it's $740,000 or maybe a little bit less, to as much as $1,054,000, or an increase, a capital gain of $314,397. So you're looking for opportunities like this. So you have an entry strategy, reasons why you might want to buy the property with a motivation to be out of the property either through a sale within 2 to 3 years. And so when you can look at these possible numbers begin to increase with the rules of engagement that you might have to work with, then it begs a closer look. So
now, I guess going back to why would you buy in a city that has rent control, really if you want to park your money somewhere and you really want to park in real estate, rent control cities might actually be a good option, because you park your money, you're going to hold on to the property long term, and you might get lucky with someone voluntarily moving out, at which point your numbers become even better.
Correct. And again, I'm just running this evaluation over a 3-year to a possible 5-year period between the time that you buy it and the time that you exit. And so when you're looking at possible increases in capital gain that you might be able to sell in 1031 exchange, I always like to look a little closer. So again, this particular property, although it's not some knock it out of the ballpark property, it's a property that is in an area that has good rents, stable tenants, and there is potential room for growth. It does beg a closer look, and the fact that the owner has reduced the price might indicate that they might be willing to deal a little bit more. And if you're looking at long term, and again, a lot of times when people think of long term, they're thinking of like 10 years or so. Well, long term for me is between 3 to 5, maybe 6 years at the most, as you're beginning to raise the rents, increase your value, or waiting for tenants to move out. For myself, I like to give my tenants an incentive to move out by helping them buy a home, for example. nowadays, if you're buying a house, you can get into a property with as little as 3.5% down. And in many cases with loans like FHA, you can gift them the down payment or a large portion thereof. And so this coincides with a little known thing about Richmond, where you can buy out your tenants and you can give them a better incentive by potentially putting them into a single family home. Then you now have a free unit which you can go right to market with, and just these little incremental increases in rent amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in value add.
So this property as it sits, is it a buy, pass, or we need a third option, like a further investigation?
It's a further investigation, and let's wheel and deal. So
perfect.
And these are those opportunities where, you call the listing agent up, find out what's going on, potentially send in an offer. And again, all of this type of negotiating coincides with the direction that the market's going, where it's a great time to buy because properties tend to sit a little bit longer. You get to wheel and deal, and then if you're a savvy investor, these dividends will pay off when the market begins to inevitably go back up.
So that's the show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're on the audio format, big shout out to East Brother Beer Company again for being our show sponsor. If you have a building that you want us to analyze, please contact us. Our contact information is here on the show in the comments description. Follow us, and we will be more than happy to analyze your property here on the show or even off the show. And
as a matter of fact, you just reminded me, I have three people that I have to call back that hit me up on my LinkedIn,
nice,
asking me to call them specifically for some things that relate to the show.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see all this activity building up. I've been doing property analysis for 3 new clients in the last week and a half because of the show.
Yeah, well, for me, it's really new and exciting.
Cool.
You got to remember, I came from a time in '91 where the first time I sat down to do a sale, they handed me a blank. They handed me a phone book. For those of you who don't know what a phone book is, it was one of those things that you got for free from your landline directory. And then I just went from A to Z and started calling people up. Nowadays, between social media and all these various tools, it's very, very interactive. So we like that about those who are watching. Interact with us, ask us questions, reach out.
And
stay
as
tuned
always,
for next week.
Thanks for watching.